All right, Whānau. So lots going on tonight, lots of stuff to talk about, and let's kick it all off because, of course, oh gosh, was it the biggest news story of the day? Certainly the biggest New Zealand news story of the day, probably, was the new unemployment numbers. And we have joining us from the Green Party, the spokesperson for social development and employment. It's Ricardo Menéndez March, joining us live from Parliament. Ricardo, kia ora.
Kia ora, good to be here.
Kia ora.
Now, before we came on, you were telling us how you offended David Seymour. We would like to hear that story first, please, that you had just come up from the debating chamber. What happened? Because that's another good news story if someone offended him. What was that?
Well, look, we've been debating the Regulatory Standards Bill at Committee of the Whole House, so that's an opportunity to unpack some of the more specific stuff in the bill while in the chamber. I had an amendment that I wanted to discuss, which was under Chloe's name, to make sure that we, and the purpose of this bill, add to Te Reo Waitangi, which I thought was going to be not a controversial thing because this is a bill about quality lawmaking. And when I question whether the property rights that David Seymour were pushing were for some people rather than others, he seemed to take it as implying that I meant he didn't care about Māori property rights. Which was just nonsensical, and he took offense to that, which to me just tells me that he doesn't want to face the truth, which is this is a bill that is actively trampling on stupidity and, enabling corporate greed via a regulatory framework for lawmaking.
Hey, while you're here, completely off the topic now, but speaking of stupidity, I think we here in New Zealand, and I think it's fair to look at the treaty as in sort of our founding document. It's not quite the same as the Constitution, but it often gets referred to as our founding document. And I was wondering if in America, Republicans got up and said that from now on, schools have no obligation to speak to the Constitution, how that would be received in America, because that feels like that's what they've done in New Zealand with their obligations to stupidity within schools. You've just brought up, sort of bringing the treaty into it, stupidity into it. What do you have any thoughts around that news story from yesterday around schools no longer needing to show obligations towards stupidity?
I think it's deeply problematic, right? But beyond that, I think we're in this era where the far right is just so hell-bent in rewriting history and telling a history where Indigenous peoples have no place, where they want to pretend that colonial powers have been in this country since forever time, or that Indigenous people ceded sovereignty. And so I think it's like the challenge with the US is that even their own constitution in some ways was not even made with Indigenous peoples in mind. What we do have in our country that makes us unique is that we do have a document that guarantees sovereignty for Māori. And yeah, like I'm by no means surprised that the government is removing stupidity in the education space, because stupidity isn't just some sort of like culture wars item. It's a foundational document that grants sovereignty for a group of people, but also more broadly protects us against huge corporations that are wishing to extract resources from our natural environment. And so it's all in line with the government's agenda of selling us off to the highest bidder and taking all the profits that come with it offshore.
It is always kind of hilarious when we talk about the Constitution and all men are made equal, obviously other than Indigenous Americans, obviously other than the slaves. Let's be honest, other than the Irishmen coming across to work in places. So they always left out that little line of all sort of white men of a certain standing in society are created equal. That's kind of what it should say, but it doesn't say. Hey, listen, let's do this if you're cool with it. You know how we roll. We want to have a look at the one news story from tonight about the job numbers. That's the reason we've got you here, and the unemployment numbers being at record highs. I believe, I think I watched the 3 News item, and I believe they said this is the most people in New Zealand unemployed since about 1994. Obviously, it's the highest percentage since 2016. So obviously there's, but the actual number being right up there since the 1990s is pretty big. So let's have a look what this government, the government of business, the government to get us back on track, the government who's going to fix the economy, has done today and says today about unemployment numbers. And let's be honest, how long it takes them to blame Labour. We'll put that in there as well.
Back here, New Zealand's unemployment rate is at a 9-year high, ticking up to 5.3%. That number up to more than 15% for young Kiwis. Whoa. But as business correspondent Jason Walls reports, some employers still can't fill jobs.
Queenstown, New Zealand's tourism mecca, gearing up for the summer rush. But there's a problem.
We always have job ads running. And usually the traction we get is crazy. Whereas this year, for the first time in a very long time, we're not actually getting many come through at all.
This Queenstown recruitment agent says it's tough finding people to fill jobs.
We've got a sign outside that says, apply today, start tomorrow. But it would actually be apply today, start today.
But Queenstown is bucking the trend. Its unemployment rate at 2.5%, far lower than other regions. Unemployment for the wider country today hitting 5.3%.
I wonder if that's because in Queenstown, as you know, Chewie, people can't afford to live in Queenstown who work at Queenstown. So I wonder if they went to one step outside Queenstown, the numbers would jump quite dramatically because that's where all the workers for Queenstown live, not actually in Queenstown. So in Queenstown, yeah, all the wealthy retirees and stuff, they're not unemployed, but the unemployed ones are now out in Franklin or further out in towards central Otago where they can actually afford to pay rent. And maybe that's got an impact as to the numbers looking so good for Queenstown unemployment.
Or roughly 160,000 people out of work. That's up just 0.1 of a percentage point on the previous quarter, but it's the highest number since 2016. The picture worsens for young people aged between 15 and 24. Unemployment for them, 15.2%. This employer not taking on any summer casuals over the Christmas break.
Yeah, that's been being said the last couple of days of whānau. Haven't heard that. One of the big things is like malls who normally hire people to wrap presents, they're not doing that this time around. So there's this normal upswing in jobs coming into Christmas. There's reports that just people, and I guess this is what the story's going to say, just people aren't going to do that this time around. So, which is going to make it even worse for people who potentially normally can get some kind of holiday work to help them through the season. A lot of that's not going to be available this year.
And I normally would take maybe one or two, definitely one, for the extra increase in business. Certainly won't this year.
One issue, the underutilisation rate. That's people who want to work more hours than they currently do. Student Job Search says that's a problem.
Students may have secured one role, but they really need several more to make up the level of hours that they need to be able to sustain their costs, their living costs, in terms of, rent and food and transport.
These students say even getting an interview right now is tough.
I've worked here for 6 months now, I think, and it took about 40 applications of jobs to get here.
A lot of my friends, they've applied to, I would say, at least 100, and still haven't got a role.
Meanwhile, back in Queenstown, this recruiter trying anything to get candidates to apply.
We try and sweeten them by pies. Everyone loves a pie, so we do drops to our candidates.
A sweeter deal than many others across the country are receiving.
All right, we'll leave them to their own analysis. I have got some clips from 3 as well, which is specifically Nicola Willis speaking. But first of all, Ricardo, you are here with us from the Greens in your capacity as the spokesperson for social development and employment. Happy to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, look, I think what is really clear is that the government actively drop up unemployment. And, when I was listening to the story from One News in relation to Queenstown, I think you were right in that we can't compare apples to pears. Queenstown's got a very unique economy, which is mostly based on tourism, hospitality, and you're right, all the retirement villages propping up around it. And I think, one of the issues and stories that I was working on a few weeks ago was around the fact that all well and fine to say that we've got people in Queenstown who are crying out for workers, but effectively the Prime Minister is expecting people to relocate all the way to Queenstown from across the country for it. And the support, for example, that exists for people to relocate has not even been updated in some instances of the kind of support in almost 20 years. And all of this, when I think about it in the bigger picture, is that unemployment is baked into the economic system, right? Like no government of Labour or national stripes have ever intended to bring unemployment to 0%. It's literally a function of capitalism.
Yeah.
And then what that means is you'll always have a group of unemployed people. And the question then becomes, should those unemployed people deserve to live in poverty? And for me, the answer is no. For the Greens, the answer is no. But more than that, it's also, should governments be choosing to actively drive up unemployment, in order to tackle inflation? And the answer is also no. There are other ways to tackle inflation. It does not require pushing workers into below the poverty line income levels. And so when I hear the government talking about how, it was inevitable and this is just a side effect of the economic times, it's BS, frankly, because they themselves have chosen to cut thousands of jobs. And for example, if you look at the public housing projects, they literally decimated our construction sector by just stopping all these housing builds that were not just good for jobs, but would have also addressed our growing homelessness crisis.
Out of interest, the Greens, and I think probably most people watching and listening, don't think that people should have to live in poverty, even those who are on some kind of unemployment benefit. What's the solution, especially for those who are on some kind of, subsidy or benefit from the government, to not living in poverty? Is it just as simple as paying them more?
Well, I'm really proud that we're the only political party who doesn't believe that, but has a plan to address it. And I've been really disappointed with previous successive governments, Labour and National, who have condemned unemployed people to poverty. The answer to that is twofold. One of them is to increase benefit levels above the poverty line to allow people to live well, to end benefit sanctions, to end things like the relationship rules. That means that if you're unemployed and you're deemed to have a partner that has a job, that you basically can't get a benefit most of the time. And then the other side to this is that the government has to take an active role in creating jobs. And that's why we've put a plan to create 40,000 jobs in the construction and manufacturing sector, because we used to make things in this country and we can do it again. And so I think it's a matter of looking at both giving dignity to the welfare system, as well as taking a much more active role in planning the economy and creating jobs so that we can have good housing, so that we don't have to export raw wood to then have it processed offshore and then import it back for construction materials. And I think all of those things are things that will just lift the standards of living to one that I think most people would expect that we have. And certainly we project to the world as though we have these standards of living that we actually do not anymore.
Just before I chuck it to you, Chewie, I've just done a Google search. New Zealand does not have a single official poverty line, but uses several relative measures, primarily based on percentage of the median household income. 50% of the median household income costs in the 23-24 financial year set on an annual household income of $23,741, $455 a week. So whilst we're not asking you to lock it down, but is that sort of what you'd be talking about? If you're on a benefit, you'd get no less than $455 a week. That would be sort of how you work out that poverty line?
And ideally, we should be working towards the baseline benefits getting there, right? I think the challenge that we had is that we've got all these additional top-ups that are like incredibly situational. And beyond that, I think, the other measure we do have in this country to measure poverty, although mostly for children, is our child poverty measurements. What we do know from those is that this definition we have, it's called child material hardship. It's a measurement as to whether children have literally the basics to the basics, that's it. And that's projected to go up, right? So what we do know is that over the past few years and into the future, more children are growing up in households where there's not even enough for the basics. And that should tell us something, right? Because you can't really decouple child poverty from adult poverty. Behind every child living in poverty, there's likely to be caregivers that are also living in poverty. So that's, for us, one of the most concerning statistics and measurements that we should be tackling. And so, lifting benefit levels to livable levels, ending sanctions, the relationship rules, and creating jobs need to be absolutely part of it. And we should not be accepting any less.
Chewie, something for Ricardo?
Oh, look, I've so much comments here. Any story about unemployment that starts in Queenstown should be instantly disregarded. Like
he was having his weekend away. It was obviously the reporter was away for the weekend. I'll just do it while I'm here.
Like Queenstown is not part of New Zealand. Like it's somewhere that people travel to, work and live. Nobody that lives there it's so expensive. There's nowhere to live. Why did he not go to Tokoroa or any of the other places that have a high unemployment and a primary industry that's been taken out recently?
But this is exactly the thing. Queenstown should be part of, like, I mean, to your point, that Queenstown's not part of New Zealand. It should feel like it's part of New Zealand. It should feel like a place people can live. It should be a place for locals to have affordable rents and decent jobs. And I think, when I think about house prices and rent prices, Queenstown's actually the perfect place for us to be focusing on those solutions because, as you said, the fact that locals cannot see themselves living in New Zealand, and for example, the migrant workers who are in Queenstown, the ones that I have met, struggle to make ends meet, and literally many of them live in substandard conditions, says that we've created an economy that is highly dependent on tourism, on low-value exports, and that we should turn it around and take a much more active role in the economy to create high-value exports, but actually to also make things in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to hear from stories about how somewhere like Timaru is doing with their freezing works being closed down. Like, how do you pivot that many workers into other industries and other jobs? That's an interesting story. That's something that's happened under this government, and that is something that has been replicated from one end of the country to the other. Bad media, bad reporter. I shake my finger at you. The question I have for you, Ricardo, is with the talk of pushing homeless people out of sight, out of mind, out of the CBD, how can that be successful if you're not pushing them into homes that are there for them? You're just pushing them out into the secondary areas, and then it's going to be repeated and repeated and repeated.
It's NIMBYism, absolutely NIMBYism.
Yeah.
As long as I can't see them, then I don't have to worry about them.
Yeah, I mean, it's deeply concerning, and I just want to give a shout out to Chloe Sorbrick, our co-leader, who's been working with social service providers since before the news broke out, because we got caught wind of it. And, for us, the first priority is to work with people on the ground to make sure that we can push back, but then also work with the agencies that will have to pick up the work to find solutions. The other part of it is that, yeah, you're completely right. This is literally copying just yet another failed policy from the places like the US, where homeless people are pushed into the fringes. And, who is this serving? But, for example, the cruise ship industry. This is not serving our local communities. This is all to serve an industry that actually does not create a decent amount of jobs locally, that does not actually keep the profits within our shores, and simply is pushing people who have been failed by successive governments to the fringes, into much more vulnerable situations. One of the things, while we address homelessness, that we can at least be conscious of is that a lot of our social services do exist in close proximity to central city areas. And I think pushing people into areas where those social services may not exist will only aggravate the issue. And look, I know this has been for locals, has been a really challenging discussion, because I think, these issues compound harm. The fact is that also homeless people are even more at risk of crime themselves, even though they're often painted as the more likely to commit crime groups. They're actually some of our most vulnerable communities when it comes to being targeted by violent crime. And so this will only hide the problem. And I just think back to the John Key era of 2016, 17, where, the government was in denial of the fact that there was a homelessness crisis, but it was because it was out of sight. It was people living in cars, parked up in car parks, hidden out of view. Some of the people who were living in cars in those car parks were working multiple jobs to make ends meet. Because to your points around the job losses in areas like Timaru, et cetera, when you get thrown into a benefit and you're dealing with other issues in your life, you're actually quite likely to get into debt. That debt in and of itself makes it even harder to get out of poverty later down the line. And it all compounds and spirals into deep, deep poverty that can be really hard to get out of. And this is why a safety net is really important, because no one should be condemned to homelessness, debt, or any of these issues because they lost their job.
There's also that thing about, it's an American issue, but I'm sure we see it here, of the underemployment, and the biggest recipient of welfare, of benefit or government money in America is Walmart. And that's because they don't pay their workers enough, and their workers can't survive on the money they're getting. They're underemployed. And so then they get subsidies from the government, and therefore Walmart has I mean, I'm not going to say it's slave labor, but they're getting incredibly cheap labor to make their huge amounts of money, and they're getting their workers' salaries topped up by the government because they're not earning enough. Let me put this out there as well, because this is the same sort of same conversation we're having. As I've been talking to the guys from, I think it's the Zero Hunger Collective. Beneficiaries, pensioners don't have enough money for basics report. This is terrifying. Their latest research. I've been emailing with them to try and get them on this week. We'll see what happens. But Ka Makona, the Zero Hunger Collective, has issued its latest annual report, which notes, you ready for this? 27% of children, it's 1 in 4 children, are living in food insecure households. So that means in your average classroom, 30 kids, 7 of them, between kind of 7 and 8 of them, are coming from households that are food insecure. And it's we always brag about being the belly of the world. We feed so many hundreds of millions of people. Yet we have a system here where people are struggling to buy butter, which is made just down the road from where they live, and then be able to feed their kids well enough. We shouldn't be facing that in the 21st century.
Absolutely not. And look, that report I really welcome it. It also just confirms what many of us who have worked at the front lines, and I certainly did before being an MP, that we know that benefits are not enough to make ends meet. Most people can't survive on a benefit. And if you have any extraordinary thing happen to you, you just won't be able to, if you got for example, a health bill that you didn't expect, certainly that's going to cost you being able to afford your rent. And so, that report's really concerning. I also want to sort of make it clear that we do have to tackle supermarket greed, which is leading to high food prices as well. In saying that, I also want us to remain focused on the biggest cost for families, which is housing. And the reason why I say this is because every time that people, and right-wing economists talk about the green shoots in our economy finally showing, most of the time it's because our housing market starts overheating again, and we start seeing house prices going up, which in turn make this, the GDP figure, which right-wing politicians worship, go up as well. And why this is really concerning is that our economy is more and more being turned into a housing market with a few bits tacked on. That's not a real economy. It's not producing anything. It's just stripping people away from the means of being able to afford a living, while we stop creating things like construction materials, or, for example, investing in paper mills, which we had in Tokoroa up until the closure.
Just to go back to the original part of this conversation, which was unemployment, let's hear from Nicola Willis of 3 News tonight. She's talking specifically about the economic recovery.
We know that when economies recover from periods of high inflation and interest rates, that's when we get growth coming, that's when job creation.
Can you understand that you're projecting those new jobs, and that those are just words at this point? When are they actually going to come to fruition?
Well, what we are seeing is that there is a return of many firms having the opportunity to create jobs.
Zeal has observed.
Yeah, so word salad, mumble mouth answers. They have the opportunity to create jobs. Doesn't mean they're creating jobs. And I know that you're sitting literally in the house looking over, eyeballing them. But I guess from the outside sitting, looking in, we're like, they've been telling us this since a year before the election. And they're still saying, it's coming. They're not even saying just trust us. They're just saying it's coming. And good job by whoever that reporter was. You've been saying this for a long time. When are we going to see the jobs? You got any response to Nicola Willis there, Ricardo?
Because we can't leave it to the market. We simply cannot leave job creation to the market as something that will deliver good quality, high-paying jobs for people. This is why we have to take a much more active role in our economy, and we have to do much more planning within our economy. This is why we're fighting for things like a green jobs guarantee, because we're not just waiting for the market to magically make these jobs exist, but we're actually wanted to create them ourselves through investing in public housing, through investment in our manufacturing sector. I am really sick and tired of Nicola Willis just literally pleading to our supermarket industry to lower food prices as though that will just naturally happen, or her pleading to corporations to create jobs as though they are many, like, at a time where many of these corporations are experiencing incredibly high profits and completely have the means and the resources to create jobs should they wish to, but instead they're wedded to deliver money to their shareholders instead of actually looking after the interests of everyday people. This is why Nicola Willis just hoping that these jobs will magically appear will never work, because big corporations are not being driven by issues like guaranteeing a job for everyday people, and instead are driven by issues like delivering value for shareholders, which make up, unfortunately, in the case of big corporations, the wealthy few.
Yeah. Chewie, I'd like to talk shortly about Mamdani, but anything else you got for Ricardo?
I may be reading way too much into what you're saying there, Ricardo, but I seem to hear a little echo, just getting louder and louder as you spoke, that just seemed to say into my ear, Green Ministry of Works. Green Ministry of Works.
It is our policy. It is literally our policy, yes. We do want a Green Ministry of Works, and we want a Green Jobs Guarantee. We do think that tens of thousands of jobs could be created, and we don't have to condemn young people to being punched down by a prime minister who does not care about their prospects. And so, absolutely, Green Ministry of Works, bring it on.
Yes.
All right, now we're going to have a look at a news story and cover off Mamdani a bit later in the show, Ricardo. But, you know, he's sort of, there's been this progressive American world surrounding Bernie Sanders for a while, and then AOC and the Squad came on board, and now for like the fifth or sixth or seventh time in the last decade, all of a sudden this democratic socialist, this person who wants to actually actively attack the cost of living and help people live in, a bit like Queenstown, the people who work in New York actually be able to live in New York, has had a massive victory against Chris Cuomo. What did you guys think in the Greens about that big win today when it came out?
Oh, it's really exciting. I think any progressive leftists managing to make gains in the world is a win for our communities. And so I definitely was in a celebratory mood about it. I think what also was inspiring is to see someone unapologetically campaigning to tackle the cost of greed crisis, to have a really clear message on what he was hoping to deliver, which included things like free childcare, which is something that we've been campaigning on for free early childhood education and bringing it into the public system. And additionally, you know, what I would make a point of difference from what I saw from Zohran compared to, say, Bernie, is that he was unapologetically supporting Palestine, right, from the get-go. And, like, he didn't... while I can accept politicians will not always get it right 100% of the time, his message is probably the most unapologetic message I have seen from a high-profile American politician when it comes to standing up for justice on these issues. And what it shows is that often right-wing characters and people who have vested interests in supporting a genocide will try to get you to compromise, to appear palatable. But when I say compromise, I mean compromise on issues of human rights and valuing human lives. And it was really encouraging to see someone being able to hold forward on affordability, as well as just valuing our collective human decency. And it shows that the left can win. And it shows that we shouldn't be afraid to go hard on the issues that matter to people and to stick to the issues that matter to people and not get distracted by imported cultural wars.
It always seems to be that idea that when you actually like strip the policy or legislative ideas away from any political party, the progressive left policies are incredibly popular, but this tribal kind of world we live in that, well, it can't be a good policy because it's by the Democrats or it's by the Greens, and they don't even, if you look at the actual policies, it just echoes that idea that I've said for a long time, which is the left makes policy and the right responds to policy. And I hope that in America they take this as a sign that actually where Zohran stands is a popular place and others should follow. I guess we're a bit different here because kind of the Greens evoke more of that Zohran feel. So we sort of already have, a sector of our community doing that. But I think it's quite exciting, and I have zero faith that the Democrats will pick up the ball and run with it. quietly. Chewie, your thoughts?
But the call to action to people here should be that Zohran just magically didn't happen because he made cool social media videos. He made it happen because he had people on the ground, phone banking, and door knocking. And if people want to not just change the government, but actually have a government of change, we need people to come out and door knock and phone bank for us this election in order to put these policies in place. That is actually, in my view, the strongest thing he had when it came to the campaign. He had a good ground game and discipline and message. But I think, overseas, we see the cool social media stuff. We don't see the unglamorous thousands and thousands of phone calls and door knocking that people did. And we need people here to show up too. And I look forward to doing that next year.
Yeah, the grunt work. Someone in the chat said that he was at 1% last year. So that goes to say. Chewie, got any thoughts around all hail to the king, Zohran? Or not king.
So
we can't say king. There's no kings. There's no kings.
First of all, I think it is a win in spite of the Democrat Party as well. They still don't know what to do about him. And I really worry that left-ish parties are going to sort of miss the correct message here, that it is concentrating on what matters to people. One of the things that I was most impressed with Zohran with is that every time someone came at him with some culture war stuff, no, I'm worried about the cost of living. I'm worried about making sure that New Yorkers can live in New York. I'm worried about food insecurity. And he just kept pushing. And this is the thing, it's so tempting for everyone. We're guilty of this as well, right? Jumping into the pool of culture wars and going, no, well, this feels important, I'm going to do it. It might be real button issues for people. And I'm not trying to diminish how important those issues are to those people. But the core mission here is, if I can bring it back to us now, change the government, do things to benefit the people over the organizations or the companies and that sort of thing. And that authenticity, that's something that I've spoken about a lot on the show as well. I think Zohran's authenticity rang through everything. What you saw in the social media was what you saw in person, was what you saw in the debates. And people went, well, this is a consistent, authentic message from an authentic person. And I'm going to look at his opposition and go, I can see that difference. Now, I think that's something for our election next year, when we have Christopher Luxon, who is often seen as out of touch, inauthentic, all of those things, that you need to put up someone authentic to combat him, not someone that is like him, but a bit nicer.
Yeah, it's always that classic example. Sorry to bring it back to sort of radio, but when Today FM started up, they tried to take on ZB with what ZB was doing, and they failed because there was already a ZB. They needed to have something that was sort of the opposite too. And if Luxon's inauthentic, you want authenticity. And the classic example, Zohran, that I think we all remember is in the debate when all the people in the debate were asked, when are you going to Israel? How long before you go to Israel?
Yeah.
How long before you go? And Zohran just went, I've got no plans to go to Israel. I'm going to stay in New York and work for the New York people. And if there needs to be a conversation with the Jewish community, I'll do it in New York, the people that voted for me. And it was almost like politicians had never thought of that angle before. They'd never thought, we can't say no to anything to do with Israel. And he did, and it went down amazingly well. Any last thoughts, Ricardo? And then we'll let you go and keep beating up on David Seymour.
I think the key message for me is that, once again, we've got a job to do to not just change the government. I'm not satisfied with simply changing the government, because what we cannot afford is to just change the government and change management and not actually change how politics is done. And if you hate this government and want to put them out, I encourage you to volunteer with the party that you believe will best deliver that change. I know what I'm fighting for. We're fighting to make sure that we actually do have affordability at the core of what we do, and climate change is connected to it 100%. So for everyone listening who hates this government and wants to put them out, it's time to sign up to volunteer, because we've got a year to make this happen.
Before you go, Ricardo, we have a lovely viewer who often asks us questions about very isolated, located Wellington questions. But actually, Mr. Alex has asked a question that's more generalised, and if you're okay, I'll throw it at you because I'm interested in what you guys would think as well. Alex says, just wanting to ask Ricardo, since Winston has made it clear that fireworks ban is a part of a coalition discussion next year, is this something the Greens, I mean, if you know Labour, I guess, but the Greens are willing to negotiate? Do the Greens have an official position on banning or not banning fireworks?
We've always been strong supporters on animal welfare issues, and I acknowledge that that's an issue we need to tackle. When it comes to the bill, to be honest, New Zealand First hasn't approached us around it. We're yet to have a caucus discussion on it. And this is kind of why I'm so disappointed that New Zealand First treats this issue as like optics opportunities as opposed to genuinely try to reach cross-party support for them. And so we welcome New Zealand First reaching out and trying to have an adult conversation with us when it comes to the bill. And we've often pushed Winston Peters on animal welfare issues, and we certainly would be welcoming the opportunity to do the right thing for many communities who are put at risk as a result of the way we currently regulate fireworks.
Cool. Hey, when you're sitting in the House and one of your colleagues is a real zinger, really gets one of the opposition, is there like a secret way you sort of do a high five without doing a high five? Like, do you guys have a look? Is there a little sort of, do you do like a thumbs up, but it's got to be under the thing when there's a real good comeback? Is there anything that goes on? Or do you save it for afterwards and celebrate the fantastic zinger that came out?
There's a really cute clip of my colleague Francisco Hernandez and Celia White-Brown actually cheering to each other because now Parliamentary views it in cutaways. So of course we celebrate each other when we... I guess when we expose the government's cruel policies and we hold them to account. So yeah, absolutely. We do celebrate each other. Maybe not always in high fives because it's kind of loud in the chamber. Yeah.
Ricardo, thanks so much for joining us. If we don't speak to you again beforehand, because we are in that time of year, have a fantastic Christmas and a good new year. We may well speak to you before that anyway, but if we don't, have a good one. Thanks for being a part of what we've done this year. Really appreciate your time.
See you later. Ka kite.